Hi there. Welcome to a series of videos called English for Emerson. Lately, we've been discussing early American history. In previous lessons, I've talked a little bit about John Rolfe, who was the founder of the tobacco trade in America. And it's a very, very interesting story. And I thought today I would explore it more because it's so interesting, well, at least to me. And it's kind of a story of adventure and survival. It's interesting. Why not? What the heck else are we going to do on this channel? Let's talk more about John Rolfe and the first colonists in a town called Jamestown. Jamestown was set up in 1607. It was named after King James. We've talked about him too on this channel, how he was originally the King of Scotland, and he was brought to become King of England after the death of Queen Elizabeth, who did not have a husband or any children. He was a filthy, smelly, disgusting human being. It's the truth. King James was flat out nasty. But he was a fairly successful king, as kings go. And this first town in what is now America, that was English-based, was named after him. They started off with about 500 people. And they had a very difficult time. They were led by a guy by the name of John Smith. He was one of the leaders. And I'll put a picture up. It's kind of interesting because there's been movies made about this guy, John Smith, but a lot of it is kind of not correct. It's all tied into how he met this girl by the name of Pocahontas. John Smith, the Jamestown was started in 1607. In late 1607, he was captured by the local Indian tribes. They were fighting with the colonists. And while he was in captivity with the Indians, he was kind of befriended by this 12-year-old girl by the name of Pocahontas. Okay? Well, they made a movie about it. The Disney made this film called Pocahontas. And in the movie, they kind of combine John Smith, who was the first leader of Jamestown, with this other guy whose name was John Rolfe, who actually became Pocahontas' husband. So historically, they kind of fuse these two people together. It's a little bit confusing. So we're going to kind of unwind that today. John Rolfe, he set sail from England in 1609. On a ship called the Sea Venture with about 150 people on it. And they were going off to Jamestown to basically bring them new supplies. Because, these original 500 colonists obviously didn't have a whole lot of stuff to work with. They just came over there and basically set up a fort. They were having tough times, okay? They didn't really understand how to grow food locally, how to survive. It was a completely new world. You had setting up and building farms and stuff like that from scratch where you don't have any power tools. It's really, really tough. They had to be resupplied. So in 1609, this ship set forth to Jamestown from England. But when they were out in the Atlantic Ocean, they got caught up in what is called a hurricane. A hurricane is one of the most powerful storms on planet Earth. I'll put up some images of just how big a hurricane can get. They can be absolutely massive storms that can be hundreds of miles across. Well, this ship called the Sea Venture got caught up in one of these things. Probably one of the earliest known European, situations where they recorded what it was like to get caught up in one of these massive storms. Well, they were just getting tossed and turned on the ocean by the storm, getting the heck beat out of them. And they all thought that they were going to die because they had to keep bailing the water out of the ship that kept getting rained down by the storm. Do you follow me? We keep filling up the ship with water. Hurricanes can generate an incredible amount of rain. Well, as they were getting prepared basically to meet their deaths, they saw some land out there in the ocean, and the captain of the ship said, "Sail for the land. We're all going to drown, and this ship's going to fall apart if we don't get aboard that land. Get on that land." So they sailed the ship for the land, and it wrecked. and was battered by the storms, and they got all the stuff off of the ship that they could, and they were out on this island. Unbeknownst to them, I don't know that they really knew where they were at, but they were on the island of what is called Bermuda, out in the Atlantic Ocean. Well, they had to figure out a way to survive. So John Rolfe and these other 150 people that were going to Jamestown, they were wrecked on this island of Bermuda with no ship. And, nobody even knew where they were at. They didn't have a phone to call anybody or a radio. They just had basically vanished into this storm. Well, they had to make do. They hunted wild pigs. They figured out how to live on the local wild food and, catch fish, things like this, just trying to survive. And they lived on this island for about 10 months. And in the meantime, they tried to take what was left of the ship that had been wrecked and the local trees and build a couple of smaller ships. It took them almost a year to do it. But eventually they hunted a bunch of these wild pigs. They made a bunch of bacon out of the pigs. They stored it on board these new smaller ships that they had built. They named their new ships the Deliverance, which means that you're saved. And they named the other ship the Patience. Well, it took a lot of patience to sit there on that island and build new ships from scratch and get everything ready to sail again. And finally, in the spring of 1609, they left the Bermuda and sailed in these two smaller ships for America. They landed soon thereafter in Jamestown, and what they saw was extremely disturbing. They had been on this island of Bermuda for so long, well, the people in Jamestown had been expecting them to arrive with supplies, and obviously they never came. When they finally showed up, out of the original 500 people who were in this community of Jamestown, only 60 were left alive, and they were starving. It's a terrible thing. Life in this original Jamestown colony was extremely hard. They almost all died. Well, thank God these people on the ships, the Deliverance and the Patience, showed up. They had food in the form of bacon and some other things that they had managed to store on their time in Bermuda, and they helped these people to kind of get their strength back and survive. But it wasn't really that long before they started to fight again with the Native Americans. And that is when Pocahontas, who had helped one of the original colonists named John Smith, she was taken as a prisoner by the colonists. And that's how she met John Rolfe. And that's where they fell in love. Anyway, their marriage made the peace at that time between the colonists in Jamestown and the local Native Americans. And then John Rolfe began to cultivate his tobacco plants. And that started the original cash crop of the Americas. It's a very interesting story. I talked in the last video how Americans love the underdog. They like the people who are kind of down on the bottom and who have to make a comeback. And Jamestown, the first English town in America, made an incredible comeback. It's kind of rooted into the American identity, the comeback, because all these people, the 500 original colonists at Jamestown, they were essentially dying off. They had been left for dead. And it was only with the arrival of John Rolfe and the rest of those formerly shipwrecked passengers to Jamestown that saved the rest of the original colonists' lives. And then they kind of had a massive comeback with the marriage of John Rolfe and Pocahontas and the cultivation of tobacco. Jamestown began to flourish and turned into a great big huge business, and was kind of the seed of the success of the English colonies of America.